Hey everyone, back by popular demand, we're doing a plant prediction video where I'm going to go through the most popular plants I see for summer 2023. Now the plants I put on this list are plants that we are selling really well. Most of these plants we cannot keep in stock, and most of them do not come from tissue culture. A couple of them do, and we'll talk about them then. But a lot of them are variegated, and a lot of the plants that we were selling really well in 2020, 2021, and years before are just not selling as well in 2023. But a lot of these plants are still selling well. I think this year is a great year to get really unicorn plants for way cheaper than what they've been in the last 3 years. I think this year in general will give us another opportunity to buy more cheaper plants in the next 12 months as the economy seemingly slows down or we really figure out what's going on with the world. So first up from the intro, we have the Epipremnum pinnatum marble. These plants are by far my favorites in the Epipremnum family. The variegation is really beautiful, and the leaf shape is something between like the Rhaphidophora, tetrasperma, and a monstera. You can really see the link between monstera and Epipremnum. I think a lot of Epipremnums are miscategorized and or vice versa. I think they really share a lot between the two genera. But the colors on this plant, the growth rate, the fact that it gets those huge leaves when you let it grow up a moss pole and grow larger and larger, and the variegation is just truly beautiful. This plant has come down a lot in price in the last 12 months, but it is still really not tough to come by, but when you come by it for a good price, you should pick it up. This is actually one of the few cuttings we have in the whole shop that are ready. It does root kind of slowly. This mother plant hasn't given off a lot of cuttings. I actually bought it at kind of the peak of the last couple years, but it is a really pretty plant. Multiple growth shoots here and branches really well. And of course, because it's a pothos, we know it roots really well, grows really fast, but it has that lighter coloring, so it's going to do all of that a little slower than a fully green plant. But Epipremnum marble, number one on plants I think are hot for summer 2023. Number two, this is the Whipple Way Philodendron. This is one of our mother plants, I believe. It's taken a cutting right there, but the shoot is coming back right there. This plant is very tough to root and grow and prop, and it has been really hard to come by in the last few years for a price less than $1,000 or $2,000. But now in this year with plant prices coming down in general across the board, I think, by the way, I think we're seeing a lot of people going to the Facebook marketplaces and flooding that channel, and we have a lot of newcomer sellers, even more so than what we did in 2020. Those ones that came to Etsy in 2020, built their own Shopify sites and things like that. I think you're seeing a lot of people getting out of the hobby and kind of purging onto Facebook Marketplace, but it's hard to come by rare plants like this unicorn plant. But again, I think this is a great time to get this plant for cheaper. If you've been looking for it, you can get it. I think the last one we sold was like $500 or $700, and that's, I mean, it's still crazy for a plant, right? I get it, but relatively in the recent days of this really beautiful plant with this speckling, the leaves are very pretty on this plant. Salmon pink color with like a green flecking through the leaves. I think the price should be stabilizing on this plant, especially after the peak in July. Summer, July is typically the peak for plant seasonality, but this is a really good plant to pick up now for a decent price. Decent relatively still, but if you've been looking for it, it might be a good time now. Next up, this is not Pink Princess. I think that plant's on the decline, but this is Red Anderson Philodendron, which is a cross of White Knight with that Pink Princess, which creates really beautiful pinkish, whitish variegation and growth habits closer to a Pink Princess, but the coloring and stem striping from the White Knight, but the pinking on the leaves, and is really a beautiful plant. It's come down a lot in price. They used to be like $500 to $700 last year, and they've come down into, last one we sold I think was like $200 or $300. So it's a very pretty plant, fun to watch grow. I don't see it in tissue culture yet. That's always a good thing for price. So I think this one's gonna continue to be a popular plant. Again, something we cannot keep in stock. Really quick update from last week's tissue culture video. If you didn't see that, go check that out. It was a lot of fun making it, but this is the plant I showed in doing the tissue culture process. This is the pothos that is 7 days old now. And the coolest thing you can see is that the shoot right there is already coming out. Just to show you guys a little bit of an update, the process of tissue culture and what happens after you put it into the media. I didn't expect this to happen. Also, there's no contamination, there's no mold. And in clear contrast, this is mold, very obviously, at the bottom there. So this is contaminated tissue culture, and this is the pothos from the video. Already putting out the little shoots, ready to multiply and grow multiple shoots. So just to show you guys what's going on there. Next up is not a really rare plant, but it is a gorgeous plant and a plant that really doesn't stop selling. This is the Syngonium Albo. This plant cannot be tissue cultured. From what I understand, it would be really tough because of its size and how tall it grows. Whenever plants grow really tall, they can't be tissue cultured really well, but it always has beautiful variegation, grows really stably, propagates really well, grows tall, fast, climbs really well. And as I said, we cannot keep this one in stock. It has come down a lot in price. They range between like 25 and 50 bucks, depending on the size, depending on where you are. We're here in the US, in California, but it's a really beautiful plant, still one of my favorites, and still a really strong, stable plant. I don't think it's increasing a lot. I don't think it's decreasing. I think it's very stable and just a good go-to variegated houseplant. You can get into albino houseplants without breaking the bank. They're gorgeous. I don't think you'll see them at garden centers anytime soon. Yep, this is the one that once was like a $10,000 plant. This plant can be had about 500, 600, 400, somewhere in there. This is the Spiritus Sancti, and this is Spiritus Sancti in tissue culture. This is the reason why this plant is coming down a lot in price. Now, you're not gonna see it for cheap in the 1 to 200s anytime soon, but this should continue to drive the price down, especially since it doesn't have variegation, and it seems like a pretty straightforward plant to grow so far from what I've seen. Pretty easy to propagate. This is a propagation of mine from my mother plant. The mother is growing back well, and these are my tissue culture multiplications, and you can see them starting to divide. So I think this plant is going to be very attainable for some people that were after it. Again, another holy grail plant, and this is a great year to get your hands on those plants that you've really wanted for a long time. And I really love the waxiness of these leaves. It's truly, truly beautiful. This one does have a little bit of leaf spot there. It might be a little fungal leaf spot, but very waxy and doesn't seem to have really any pest issues. But when it gets large, obviously they're so beautiful when they're large, much like the Bilite. But all of these really rare plants from 2020 that went for multi-thousands of dollars have come down into the sub $1,000 in most places. So if you've always wanted Spiritus, check one out. I think they're worth the hype, honestly. And I really like this plant. I can't wait to see what it continues to do. All right, next up is the Burle Marx Philodendron. I have talked about this plant a lot in the past, but it has not stopped selling. So I'm talking about it again. And it's a little hard to ship, so that's also going to make a plant more popular and tougher to get your hands on, since people can't just ship them directly to each other too easily. It has very soft leaves, and because of that, it can get damaged in the weather and just really banged around quite quickly with such thin leaves. She's got thin skin, you might say. And as I talked about in the pruning video, you just have to remove the lower green shoots to get rid of this variety of variegation so that you get more of the mix of variegation. And because it's not that stable variegation, it goes all yellow or all green, you're not gonna see this plant in TC for that reason, TC being tissue culture. So I love the Burle Marx Philodendron. She's beautiful. She grows really fast, propagates really fast. Big fan of this plant. I think it's really stable. You can get it between $25 and $55 depending on the size. Check out the Burle Marx Philodendron. Another plant that went at auction during COVID era, I wanna say in like New Zealand, for multi-thousands of dollars. I wanna say like $14,000 or something crazy. I'll pull up the article and put it here, but this is the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma Variegata. This is a really cool plant. I think all of us love Rhaphidophora, the normal variety, when it came out in 2017 or 2018. It was really expensive even for a green plant. I think we paid like $150 for an all green Rhaphidophora, which just grow like wildfire. So someone made a killing on that plant. But this is the variegated version, and it was very holy grail for the last 3 years. But again, we're in a very weird year for plants. I think we're in a heavy supply and a lower demand naturally. That makes for cheaper prices for you, for me, or whoever buys plants. But if you've been waiting to get one, I think you can get one for sub 500 here in the US. This is the only one we have, and I don't even know if it's for sale, honestly. It's really pretty. I had to grow it back from this node, but it's got like 2 or 3 growth shoots and has been really easy to grow, just like Rhaphidophora tetrasperma non-variegated version. And it's just fun to watch grow, let it vine up a wall. So check out this plant if you've been looking for one. Great year to buy one, or wait till next year. But I think this plant is going to remain stable. Typically the Monstera-esque versions of plants like Rhaphidophora with that thick stem aren't going to be put in tissue culture as readily, and also its variegation seems a little less stable, closer to like the Albo versus the Thai constellation of variegation, if that makes sense. So they're not going to probably put this one into tissue culture. And from all my vendors of tissue culture, I'm not getting any lists that contain Rhaphidophora. And typically when they put it on, they'll put it on for like $600 for a piece of a stem, which just doesn't make any sense when I can buy a big mother plant for $400 to $600. I know, I didn't expect this plant to still be here, but it still is, because I cannot keep this plant in stock, and I've seen a lot of other vendors not being able to keep the full size of this plant in stock, the big size that come from cutting, not from tissue culture, because growing these from tissue culture is a complete pain in the ass. This plant I think is like 10 months old or something, and I can't sell them for like $30. The economics of that do not make sense. But this plant goes for about 45 to 65. If the bigger ones go up to like 75 on Etsy, but the bigger ones are gorgeous, and they have to be cut from stem culture, or rather from stem propagation. And they are beautiful. I love the Florida Ghost. It has beautiful, beautiful colors, and yes, it's not crazy expensive. It never really was, but it's still holding its price this year. Its price is pretty much the same as it was last year, if not a little more expensive. I don't know if someone made a video about it, popularizing it even more, but it's worth the hype. I've always liked this plant. The mother plants in the back have done really, really well over the years, and you can tell when the plant is not from TC because it doesn't get those tiny little leaves. You'll get really small leaves, and you can tell they over-induce the plant with a hormone for the shooting, so it makes really thin leaves and makes it kind of ugly and grow really slow, like this one. This is what I'm referring to in over-TCing a plant. This is too much BAP, which is the shooting hormone from last week's tissue culture video. Look at all the teeny little pink princess leaves, and like it's like a bush and just doesn't grow. This is like 4 months of growth, so no fun. And another Syngonium making the list and holding its value for the last few years. This is the Syngonium Panda Galaxy War. I really adore this plant. It's probably my favorite Syngonium just because it's so unique, and its variegation patterns really vary from the same mother plant depending on where you take the cutting. It will have like kind of chill, mellow variegation like that, but this new leaf that's coming out has that Galaxy War inside of it, much like the Thai constellation. So you could possibly see this in tissue culture. I don't see that happening. It's very rare to do Syngoniums in tissue culture, and they're just not that popular because they cut so well from stem cuttings. A good rule of thumb, if it clones really well with stem cuttings, they're not going to put it in tissue culture. Like the pothos, they're just not going to put that plant in tissue culture. But you can get this plant for sub 100 now. I think I paid like $150 for the mother plant a couple years back in the crazy houseplant craze days. But I think you get a small one like this for maybe like $50 or so here in the US. It's a really cool Syngonium. Grows fast, roots fast. We love Syngonium here. And finally, one of my favorite plants in the shop and impossible to ship, or damn near impossible to ship, the Musa. This is a variegated banana tree, and you guys have seen me talk about this plant a lot. It is in tissue culture, but what's keeping the price of this plant so high is the import ban that does exist in the US. You can't import this plant if the roots have dirt on them. It's not allowed. Customs will stop that, and they will destroy the plant. So they have to come in tissue culture bags or vessels. And then once you have the plants, like I do, grown up from tissue culture, like these two beasts, they're really hard to ship. They're really fickle. These are in complete leca. I'm watering them a couple times a week in 100% leca, and they love it. But if I were to put them in aeroid mix or disturb the roots too much, it's really tough to get them to acclimate. So once you get them in a media, then they really need to stay in that media, and they can really get a lot of transit shock. And because they're tropical, they definitely get weather shock too. But I love this plant. Every time it puts out a new leaf, I'm always blown away by the variegation. It's very stable in variegation. Every leaf from this big mother plant has came out the same way, and each variety, this one had a little more white in it to begin with and continues to put out a little more white dominant leaves. This one is like perfectly balanced. And I think this plant's gonna continue to be popular for the reasons I outlined. The no importing and tough to ship just makes for a higher price and a higher demand on these plants. I think I was offered like $400 on one of these recently. The deal didn't go through, but just to give you a range of the price, these kind of go for like $250 to like I've seen one go for $800 that was like 3 feet tall. So I don't know, $250 to $500 to $600, somewhere in there is this price range. So thank you guys so much for watching this week's video. If you did enjoy the video, please click the like button down below and consider subscribing, since we make 2 videos every week about houseplants. Thanks so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.